The starship descended through clouds that sparkled like crushed diamonds. And Ambassador Marcus Cole pressed his face against the viewport like a child seeing snow for the first time. And he could not believe what he was seeing below him. The capital city of the Velothi Empire stretched across the entire continent, and every building looked like it had been carved from pure crystal. And towers reached toward the purple sky like frozen flames. And bridges made of what looked like glass connected everything in patterns that seemed impossible. "Beautiful, is it not?" asked his translator, a small creature named Tovik, who belonged to a servant species that had worked for the Velothi for thousands of years. "I have never seen anything like it," Marcus admitted, and he meant every word. "The Velothi have spent 10,000 years building this city," Tovik explained. And his 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he spoke. "And they consider it the greatest achievement in the known galaxy. And they are very proud of their culture and their history." Marcus nodded and tried to remember everything he had learned about these aliens during his 6-month journey from Earth. And the information was overwhelming but important. The Velothi were tall and thin, and their bodies looked like they had been made from living porcelain. And their skin had a soft glow that changed colors based on their emotions. And they moved with a grace that made even the most skilled human dancers look clumsy. They had ruled this section of the galaxy for longer than humans had existed as a species. And they considered themselves the most advanced and civilized beings in existence. And they looked down on all other species as inferior. When humans had first made contact with the galactic community 5 years ago, the Velothi had shown little interest, and they had dismissed Earth as a minor planet with nothing to offer. And they had ignored all attempts at communication. But then human merchants had started trading with other species. And human technology had started spreading. And human culture had started gaining popularity. And suddenly the Velothi had realized that these newcomers might actually matter. So they had invited a human ambassador to their homeworld to discuss trade agreements. And Marcus Cole had been chosen for this important mission. And now here he was, about to meet beings who considered themselves gods among insects. The ship landed on a platform that floated in the air without any visible support. And Marcus stepped out into air that smelled like flowers and electricity. And he took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm no matter what happened. A group of Velothi officials waited for him, and they were even more impressive in person than in the images he had studied. And they stood almost 8 feet tall with limbs that looked too thin to support their bodies. And their eyes were large and completely black and seemed to look right through him. "Welcome to Velasara," said the lead official, and his voice sounded like music. "And we hope your journey was comfortable, and we are pleased that you have accepted our invitation." "Thank you for having me," Marcus replied, and he bowed slightly as he had been taught. "And I am honored to be here, and I hope we can build a strong friendship between our peoples." The officials exchanged glances that Marcus could not read, and he wondered if he had said something wrong. But they simply turned and gestured for him to follow them. They walked through corridors that seemed to be made of solid light. And Marcus tried not to stare at everything like a tourist. But it was hard when every surface reflected rainbows and every room contained wonders he had never imagined. Finally, they reached a massive door that was 3 times the height of Marcus, and it swung open silently. And Marcus found himself standing at the entrance to the throne room of the Velothi Empire. The chamber was enormous, and the ceiling was so high that clouds actually formed near the top, and thousands of Velothi nobles filled the room. And they all turned to look at the human who had just entered. At the far end of the room sat the emperor on a throne that seemed to be made of captured starlight. And beside him sat a younger Velothi female who Marcus recognized from his briefings as Princess Silara Tyvorn, the emperor's only daughter and heir to the empire. Marcus walked forward slowly, and he felt every eye in the room following him, and he heard whispers in languages he did not understand. and he kept his head high and his steps steady. "So this is a human?" the princess said, and her voice dripped with contempt that needed no translation. "I must say I am not impressed, and they are even smaller and uglier than I expected." Some of the nobles laughed at her words, and Marcus felt his face grow warm. But he kept his expression neutral because he was a professional and he would not let insults shake him. "Your Highness," he said with another bow, "I am Ambassador Marcus Cole, and I bring greetings from Earth and from all of humanity. And we are grateful for this opportunity to discuss trade and cooperation between our peoples." The Emperor raised one long-fingered hand, and the room fell silent immediately, and Marcus was impressed by the absolute control this being had over his subjects. "You may approach," the Emperor said, and his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. Marcus walked forward until he stood at the base of the throne platform, and he looked up at the two most powerful beings in this part of the galaxy, and he reminded himself that he represented all of humanity in this moment. "We have heard interesting things about your species," the Emperor said, and his tone was neutral, but his black eyes studied Marcus with obvious curiosity. "And we have decided to consider trading with you. And these negotiations will determine whether humanity has anything of value to offer the Velothi Empire. I am confident we can find mutually beneficial arrangements," Marcus replied, and he kept his voice calm and respectful. Princess Selara made a sound of disgust, and her skin flashed an angry red color, and she looked at Marcus like he was something unpleasant she had found on the bottom of her shoe. "Mutually beneficial," she repeated with a sneer. "And what could humans possibly offer that we do not already have? And what makes you think you have anything we need?" Marcus took a breath and prepared to answer, but he knew already that these negotiations would not be easy, and he wondered what challenges awaited him in the days to come. 3 days had passed since Marcus arrived on Velathara, and the negotiations had been difficult from the very beginning. And Princess Selara had made everything harder with her constant insults and interruptions. Every meeting followed the same pattern, and Marcus would present a proposal, and the Velothi trade ministers would consider it carefully. And then the princess would say something cruel about humans that made everyone laugh. She called them primitive, and she called them ugly, and she called them barely evolved animals who did not deserve to breathe the same air as the Velothi, and Marcus had to bite his tongue every single time. Today's session had been the worst yet, and they were discussing mining rights for a group of asteroids that contained valuable minerals. And Marcus had offered very generous terms that would benefit both species. "This is a fair proposal," said Trade Minister Varath, and he was one of the few Velothi who seemed to take the negotiations seriously. "And I believe we should consider accepting these terms." Princess Selara slammed her delicate hand on the table, and the sound echoed through the crystal chamber like a bell. "Fair," she screamed, and her skin turned a deep purple color that Marcus had learned meant extreme anger. "And you call this fair when these creatures are trying to steal from us? And you would let these animals take what belongs to the Velothi Empire?" "Your Highness," Marcus said carefully, and he tried to keep his voice calm, "we are not trying to steal anything, and we are offering to share the resources equally, and this would benefit both of our peoples." "Equally!" the princess shouted, and she stood up so fast that her chair flew backward. "And you dare to speak of equality, and you dare to suggest that humans are equal to the Velothi." The room had gone very quiet, and every official was watching the confrontation with wide black eyes, and Marcus could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. "I meant no offense," Marcus said, and he raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "And I am simply trying to find an agreement that works for everyone." "You meant no offense," Selara repeated in a mocking voice, and she stepped around the table and walked toward Marcus. "And yet your very presence here is an offense, and your very existence is an insult to our empire." Marcus stood his ground even as the princess approached him, and she was almost 2 feet taller than him. and she loomed over him like a tower of living crystal. "For 3 days, I have watched you sit in our sacred halls," she hissed, and her breath smelled like exotic flowers. "And for 3 days, I have listened to you speak as if you have the right to negotiate with us. And for 3 days, I have wanted to show you your true place in this galaxy." Princess Saylara, Trade Minister Vorath, said nervously, "Perhaps we should take a break and continue tomorrow." But the princess ignored him completely, and her eyes never left Marcus's face, and her skin was now pulsing between purple and bright red. "You come from a tiny planet in a forgotten corner of the galaxy," she said, and each word was filled with venom. "And your species has existed for barely a moment compared to our ancient civilization, and you think you can demand equality?" "I am not demanding anything," Marcus replied, and he kept his voice steady even though his heart was pounding. "I'm simply here to talk, and I believe we can find common ground if we try." "Common ground?" The princess laughed, and the sound was high and sharp and unpleasant. "And what common ground could there possibly be between gods and insects?" She raised her hand, and Marcus saw what was coming, and he could have moved, but he chose not to because he knew that dodging would make things worse. The princess swung her palm toward his face with all the strength her royal anger could give her, and she aimed to humiliate him in front of every official in the room. What happened next would change everything. Her hand connected with Marcus's cheek, and the sound that filled the room was not the sharp crack of flesh hitting flesh that everyone expected. Instead, there was a horrible crunching noise, and it sounded like someone stepping on dried leaves mixed with breaking glass. And it was the most awful sound Marcus had ever heard. The princess stumbled backward, and her mouth opened in a scream that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, and she clutched her hand against her chest. Marcus touched his cheek and felt that it was warm and slightly red, but he was fine except for a mild stinging sensation. But Princess Saylara was not fine at all, and when she finally looked at her hand, everyone in the room saw the damage. Her fingers bent in directions that fingers should never bend, and white bones stuck out through her glowing skin in several places, and blood that was pale blue in color dripped onto the crystal floor. "Guards!" someone shouted, and suddenly the room was full of movement and screaming. Velothi soldiers rushed toward Marcus with weapons drawn, and officials ran toward the princess, and medical attendants appeared from nowhere and surrounded the injured royal. "I did not move," Marcus shouted, and he held his hands up to show he was not a threat. "And she hit me, and I never touched her." He attacked the princess. One of the guards yelled, and he pointed his weapon at Marcus's head. "Check your recordings," Marcus said quickly, and he knew that everything in this room was being recorded by multiple systems. "And you will see that I stood completely still, and she injured herself when she struck me." The Emperor's voice cut through the chaos like a knife through silk, and everyone froze in place. "Enough!" he commanded, and the single word carried more authority than any speech Marcus had ever heard. The room fell silent except for the princess's whimpering, and everyone looked at the Emperor, and Marcus felt his fate hanging in the balance. "Show me the recording," the Emperor said quietly, and his voice was cold and dangerous. "And show me exactly what happened to my daughter." A holographic image appeared in the center of the room, and it showed the last 30 seconds in perfect detail. And everyone watched as the princess approached Marcus and swung her hand. The recording clearly showed that Marcus had not moved at all, and the princess had hit him, and she had somehow destroyed her own hand against his face. "How is this possible?" the Emperor whispered, and for the first time Marcus heard fear in the ancient being's voice. The medical bay of the Imperial Palace was the most advanced facility Marcus had ever seen, and machines that looked like floating crystals hummed as they scanned Princess Saylara's destroyed hand. Marcus stood in the corner under heavy guard, and he watched as doctors worked on the princess, and he still could not fully believe what had happened in the throne room. The Emperor stood nearby with his advisors, and they spoke in hushed voices that Marcus could not understand, and their skin colors shifted constantly between shades of blue and purple and gray. Chief Physician Talvex was an ancient Velothi with skin that had faded to a pale white color, and he had been caring for the royal family for hundreds of years, and his hands trembled slightly as he examined the princess. "I do not understand this," Talvex muttered as he studied the medical scans, "and the damage is extensive, and it is as if she struck a wall made of solid metal. Can you heal her?" the Emperor asked, and his voice was tight with worry. "The regeneration tanks will repair the physical damage over time," Talvex replied. "But I have never seen injuries like this from a simple slap, and I need to understand how this happened." He turned to look at Marcus, and his old eyes narrowed with curiosity rather than anger. "Human," he said, and he gestured for Marcus to come closer, "and I must examine you to understand what occurred." The guards looked at the Emperor for permission, and the Emperor nodded slowly, and Marcus walked forward until he stood next to the examination table. "Hold out your hand," Talvex commanded, and Marcus obeyed without hesitation. The physician took Marcus's hand in his own, and immediately his eyes widened in surprise, and he pressed his fingers against Marcus's palm and wrist. "The density," Talvex whispered, and he sounded shocked. "And the mass of your tissue is far beyond anything in our medical records. And what are humans made of?" "I am made of the same things as any human," Marcus answered honestly, "and my bones are calcium and phosphate reinforced with collagen, and my muscles are protein fibers, and my skin is layers of cells." Talvex used a scanning device to examine Marcus's arm, and when the results appeared on the floating display, every Velothi in the room gasped. "This cannot be correct," one of the advisors said, as she stepped forward to look at the scan more closely. "I have run the scan 3 times," Talvex replied, and his voice shook slightly. "And the results are the same every time, and this human skeletal structure is completely solid." "What do you mean by solid?" the Emperor asked. "Velothi bones are hollow," Talvex explained, and he pulled up a comparison image showing both species. "And our skeletal system evolved for efficiency and lightness. And our bones are filled with air pockets that reduce weight while maintaining strength." He pointed at the scan of Marcus's arm, and the difference was obvious even to those who knew nothing about medicine. "Human bones have no hollow spaces," Talvex continued, "and they are dense all the way through, and they are reinforced with a web of protein that makes them flexible, yet incredibly strong." "So when my daughter struck him," the Emperor said slowly, an understanding dawned on his ancient face. "Her delicate hand bones met solid dense tissue," Talvex finished the thought, "and it was like striking a wall, and the force she generated was turned back against her own body." Princess Selara moaned from her bed, and her destroyed hand was now sealed in a regeneration pod, and she had been given medicine for the pain, but she was still conscious. "Father," she said weakly, "and what manner of creature is this human?" The Emperor turned to Marcus, and his black eyes studied the human with new interest and something that might have been fear. "Tell us about your world," the Emperor commanded, "and tell us what kind of planet produces beings like you." Marcus took a deep breath and nodded, and he knew that this moment might determine the future relationship between humans and Velothi. "Earth is what other species call a death world," Marcus began, and he saw the Velothi exchange worried glances at those words. "The gravity on Earth is much stronger than on Velathara," he continued, "and from the moment we are born, we must fight against a force that pulls us down constantly. And our bones and muscles develop density to resist this gravity." "How much stronger?" one of the advisors asked. "About 40% stronger than your homeworld," Marcus replied. "And this means that every step we take, every movement we make, requires more strength than it would here." "That explains the density," Talvex said thoughtfully. "But there must be more to your species than heavy gravity." "There is much more," Marcus agreed, and he continued his explanation. Earth has extreme weather that changes throughout the year, and we have burning deserts and frozen tundras and violent storms that can destroy entire cities. And humans have survived all of these environments. We have predators that have hunted us since the beginning of our existence, and we have diseases that have killed millions of our kind, and we have faced extinction several times in our history. Our planet has earthquakes that shake the ground, and volcanoes that rain fire from the sky, and floods that cover the land with water, and through all of this humans have survived and adapted. The room was completely silent as Marcus spoke, and every Velothi was listening with a mixture of horror and fascination. Our bodies have evolved to heal rapidly, Marcus continued, and when our bones break, they grow back stronger than before, and when our muscles tear, they rebuild themselves denser and more powerful. We can survive wounds that would kill most species, he said, and he pulled up his sleeve to show a scar on his arm. And this is from an accident I had as a child. And the bone broke completely but healed within weeks. Princess Salar stared at the scar with wide eyes, and she looked at her own damaged hand in the regeneration pod. How long would a similar injury take to heal for a human? She asked quietly. A few months, Marcus replied, and maybe less if we are young and healthy, and we would not need machines to do it. The silence that followed was heavy with implications that everyone in the room understood, and the Velothi were finally beginning to realize what kind of species they had invited into their empire. The following day, Marcus was summoned to a private meeting with the Emperor, and he was led through corridors he had not seen before. And they went deeper and deeper into the palace until they reached a room that was clearly meant for only the most important conversations. The chamber was smaller than the throne room but far more impressive, and the walls were covered with star maps that showed the entire Velothi Empire, and thousands of star systems glowed with soft light. Emperor Varath Tyvorn sat on a simple chair that was nothing like his grand throne, and he looked tired and old in a way that Marcus had not noticed before, and there were no guards or advisors present. "Please sit," the Emperor said, and he gestured to a chair across from him, "and we must talk honestly without others listening." Marcus sat down carefully, and he wondered what the most powerful being in this part of the galaxy wanted to discuss in private. "I have ruled the Velothi Empire for 3,000 years, the Emperor began, and his voice was soft and thoughtful. "And in that time I have met representatives of hundreds of species from across the galaxy. I have seen empires rise and fall," he continued, "and I have watched civilizations destroy themselves, and I have learned to judge species not by their words, but by their nature. What have you judged about humans?" Marcus asked. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment, and his black eyes seemed to look through Marcus rather than at him. "When your ships first appeared in our territory," the Emperor said finally, "and we scanned them and studied your species from afar, and we concluded that humans were unremarkable. You were small and weak compared to many species," he continued, "and your technology was primitive by galactic standards, and your civilization was young and inexperienced. We dismissed you as another minor species that would fade into obscurity," the Emperor admitted, "and we believed you had nothing to offer that we could not create ourselves." Marcus listened without interrupting, and he could see that the Emperor was leading somewhere important. "But yesterday, I watched my daughter shatter her hand against your face," the Emperor said, "and I realized that we had made a terrible mistake in our judgment. The mistake was not understanding what a death world truly means," Marcus replied. "Yes," the Emperor agreed, and he leaned forward with sudden intensity. "And so I spent the entire night researching your planet, and I used every database and intelligence source available to the Empire. And what I learned has changed everything I thought I knew about your species." He waved his hand, and a holographic image of Earth appeared between them, and it was beautiful and blue and looked peaceful from space. "This is your homeworld," the Emperor said. "And from here, it looks harmless. And it looks like any other life-bearing planet." The image zoomed in to show different regions of Earth, and Marcus felt a wave of homesickness as he recognized familiar landscapes. "But the data tells a different story," the Emperor continued. "And your planet is one of the most hostile environments in the known galaxy." Images began flashing across the display, and each one showed a different way that Earth tried to kill its inhabitants. "Volcanic eruptions that can block out your sun for years," the Emperor said as images of volcanoes appeared, "and earthquakes that can level cities in seconds, and floods that can drown entire countries. Extreme temperatures that range from hot enough to boil water to cold enough to freeze your blood," he continued, "and storms that spin with enough force to lift buildings into the air, and radiation from your own star that can kill with prolonged exposure. And then there are the other life forms," the Emperor said, and images of predators appeared on the display, and creatures with teeth and claws designed for killing, and venomous animals that inject poison with a single bite, and microscopic organisms that can wipe out millions of your kind. Marcus nodded at each example, and he had never really thought about how dangerous Earth must seem to species from gentler worlds. "The most terrifying thing I learned," the Emperor said quietly, "is that humans did not just survive these threats, and you conquered them. You hunted your predators to extinction," he said, "and you built shelters against the weather, and you developed medicine to fight disease, and you spread across every environment your planet has to offer." "We did what we had to do to survive," Marcus said simply. "But that is exactly what frightens me," the Emperor replied. "And you did not just survive, and you thrived, and you grew stronger with every challenge." He stood up and walked to the star map on the wall, and he gazed at the thousands of lights that represented his empire. "The Velothi evolved on a paradise world," he said softly, "and our planet had gentle weather and abundant food and few predators, and we never had to struggle the way your ancestors did. We developed intelligence and technology," he continued, "and we expanded into space and built an empire, and we came to believe we were the pinnacle of evolution. But we were never tested the way humans have been tested," the Emperor admitted, "and we were never forged in fire the way your species was forged." He turned back to Marcus, and there was something new in his ancient eyes. "My daughter called you evolved predators from a death world as an insult," he said, "and she meant to diminish you, and she did not understand what those words truly meant. Predators who survived a death world," the Emperor said slowly, "and predators who adapted to every challenge, and predators who refused to die no matter what the universe threw at them. You are not our inferiors," he concluded, "and you may be the most dangerous species we have ever encountered." Marcus met the Emperor's gaze steadily, and he chose his next words very carefully. "We do not wish to be your enemies," Marcus said, "and humans have had enough of war on our own planet, and we came here hoping to find friends among the stars. Can we be friends with a species that could crush us without even trying?" the Emperor asked. "That depends," Marcus replied, "and it depends on whether you can accept us as equals, and it depends on whether the Velothi can overcome their pride." The Emperor was silent for a long time, and Marcus could almost see the thoughts turning behind those black eyes. "I must think on this," the Emperor said finally, "and I must consult with my advisors, and I must decide what this means for the future of my empire." "Take all the time you need," Marcus said, and he stood and bowed respectfully. "And humanity has waited a long time to join the galactic community, and we can wait a little longer." 1 week had passed since the incident in the throne room, and Marcus had spent most of that time confined to his guest quarters while the Velothi decided what to do with him. He had expected to be sent home in disgrace, and he had prepared himself for the failure of his mission, and he had already started composing his resignation letter in his head. But instead of deportation, he received an invitation. and a messenger arrived at his door with a summons to attend a formal ceremony in the Imperial Gardens. And the message said that his presence was specifically requested by Princess Selara herself. Marcus dressed in his finest diplomatic uniform, and he made sure every button was polished and every crease was perfect. And he walked through the palace corridors with his head held high. The Imperial Gardens were unlike anything on Earth, and plants with glowing leaves grew alongside flowers that sang soft melodies, and waterfalls flowed upward instead of down, and the beauty was almost overwhelming. A large crowd had gathered in the central pavilion, and Marcus recognized many faces from the failed negotiations, and they all turned to watch as he approached. Princess Selara stood at the front of the crowd, and her hand was still wrapped in regeneration bandages. But she looked stronger than she had in the medical bay, and her skin glowed with healthy colors. "Ambassador Cole," she said formally, and her voice carried across the garden, "and I have summoned you here to address what happened between us." Marcus stopped a respectful distance away and bowed, and he waited for whatever judgment the princess had decided to deliver. "I struck you in anger," Selara continued, "and I intended to humiliate you in front of the court. And I believe that my superior breeding gave me the right to treat you as less than equal." The crowd murmured at her honest words, and Marcus saw surprise on many faces, and he realized that the princess was doing something very unusual. "My arrogance cost me greatly," she said, and she raised her bandaged hand for everyone to see. "And the pain I suffered was the least of what I lost. And my pride has been shattered more thoroughly than my bones." She took a step closer to Marcus, and her black eyes met his without any trace of the contempt he had seen before. "In the weeks since our encounter," she said, "and I have studied everything I could find about humans, and I have learned about your history and your struggles and your achievements. I learned about your world wars," she continued, "and how humans fought against each other with weapons that could destroy cities, and yet you survived and rebuilt and grew stronger. I learned about your diseases," she said, "and plagues that killed half your population, and yet you developed medicine and pushed forward. I learned about your space program," she said, "and how you strapped yourselves to explosions and launched yourselves into the void, and some of you died, but others kept going." The garden was completely silent now, and every Velothi was listening to their princess with something like awe. "You are not a lesser species," Selara declared, and her voice rang out clear and strong. "And you are survivors of a world that would have destroyed any of us. And you have earned your place among the stars through suffering and perseverance." She turned to the crowd and raised her voice even louder. "The Velothi have always believed we were superior," she announced, "and we have looked down on other species for thousands of years, and we have been wrong. Strength is not measured by elegance or beauty," she said, "and civilization is not measured by the age of your buildings, and worth is not determined by the softness of your skin. The humans have something we do not have," she admitted, "and they have been tested in ways we cannot imagine, and they have proven themselves against challenges we could never face." She turned back to Marcus and did something that made every Velothi in the garden gasp with shock. Princess Selara, heir to the Velothi Empire, descendant of 10,000 years of royal blood, bowed to the human ambassador. "I apologize for my treatment of you," she said quietly, "and I apologize on behalf of the Velothi people, and I ask that you forgive our ignorance and accept our friendship." Marcus was stunned, and he had never expected anything like this, and he had to take a moment to find his voice. "I accept your apology," he said finally, "and I offer friendship on behalf of all humanity, and I believe this is the beginning of something wonderful for both our peoples." Selara straightened and smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her, and it transformed her face from cold beauty to warm radiance. "Then let us begin again," she said, and she extended her uninjured hand toward him. Marcus took her hand carefully, and he was amazed at how fragile it felt in his grip. And he understood now why the Velothi had been so shocked by his density. The trade negotiations will resume tomorrow, Emperor Varath announced from nearby, and Marcus had not noticed him approach. And this time we will discuss terms as equals. The crowd burst into applause, and Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. And he knew that his mission had succeeded beyond anything he had hoped. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his quarters and composed his report to Earth, and he smiled as he typed the words. First contact with the Velothi Empire. Successful, he wrote. And minor diplomatic incident resolved. And they have agreed to treat humanity as equals. The incident with Princess Saylara has actually improved our position, he continued. And the Velothi now understand that humans are not the weak primitives they assumed. And they have a new respect for our species. Personal note, he added, and I recommend that future ambassadors receive training in what to do when aliens try to slap them. And the answer is apparently to just stand there and let them hurt themselves. He paused and thought about everything that had happened, and he added one final line to his report. Humanity's reputation in this galaxy is now established, he wrote. And we are known as survivors of a death world who can shatter alien hands with our faces. And I cannot decide if this is good or bad, but it is definitely interesting. He sent the report and walked to his window, and he looked out at the crystal city glowing under alien stars. And he thought about all the adventures that awaited humanity among the cosmos. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again, and that single slap had changed everything. And Marcus Cole had accidentally become a legend.